How's it going, everyone? And welcome to the first installment of the evolution of Bionicle sets. I had this plan of doing such a video series for some time, and now I am finally getting around to it. Now granted, I did actually do a voice recording for half of this commentary sometime back in September, and was initially planning on releasing it then. But some other things had come up, and so now I am posting the evolution video series right now. Now, there is something that I'm going to point out about the series. For starters, I'm going to be going over the following different types of sets. I'll be going over the Toa sets and anything that qualifies, the enemy sets, the small character sets, the Titan sets, the vehicle, Rahkshi, and rider sets, which are the sets that includes either a Toa or a Matoran with a vehicle or Rahkshi that they ride on. And I will also be looking over special sets, sets that pretty much stick out from one another. I'm not going to be looking over some other forms of merchandise, such as backpacks, shoes, toothbrushes, etc. I am only going to be looking over the actual official sets themselves, the ones that you actually build. And I should also point out is that I bet some people will say, oh, you didn't include this character, or you didn't include that character in some videos. Well, I will suspect that in the evolution of Toa sets, there are going to be some people that are going to say, oh, you didn't include the first version of Takanuva, or you didn't include Toa Lhikan, or you didn't include the Toa Haga. Well, yes, I didn't include them, but not because I forgot to include them, but because I do not think that they qualify for the regular sets. I kind of would like to prefer to classify them as being special sets or part of the character and Rahkshi or vehicle rider sets, so do keep that in mind. With that out of the way, let's begin with the evolution of the Toa sets from 2001 to 2016. Starting off, we have the Toa Mata, or just simply Toa as they were called at the time. I am not sure if Toa Mata is an official name from LEGO, or if it's just a fan-created name, since the Toa from 2004 were called the Toa Metru for protecting Metru Nui, and the Toa from 2007 were called the Toa Mari since they helped out at Mari Nui. So, Toa Mata is what I will be referring to these guys by. The Toa Mata consisted of Tahu, Kopaka, Gali, Pohatu, Onua, and Liwa. They all had a similar build to one another with some slight differences. Tahu, Kopaka, and Liwa were all average as they both had just one weapon piece with one gear connecting them, along with each having a black ball piece on their chest, which are thankfully replaceable if you lose one like I did with the original one from Tahu. Gali was different in that she had two weapon pieces with her gears being connected to both arms, and she also had a blue Technic Cup piece on her chest instead of a black ball piece. Onua was the shortest of them, as his head is attached to his chest, making him like a hunchback, and like Gali, also had two weapons in each of his hands, and gears attached to both arms. And Pohatu was the most unique, as his torso was flipped, so his gears attached to his leg instead of to an arm. Pohatu didn't carry any weapons in his arms, but instead has some special coverings on his feet, with them serving as his weapons. Pohatu also contained a brown system rock, making him one of the first Bionicle sets to use parts from a standard LEGO building system. So you have something for him to kick around. Pohatu doesn't have anything attached to his chest, but the instructions show that Pohatu had a black ball piece on his chest, much like Tahu, Liwa, and Kopaka do, as well as having two on each of his shoulders, which he still has, but not on his chest. But obviously, the actual set itself doesn't have this. This leads me to believe that Pohatu was originally going to have this black ball piece on its chest, but it was removed at the last minute, which could explain why the Fiku Spider combination model between Pohatu and Onua requires you to use 3 black ball pieces when you only have 2 out of the 2 sets. I guess LEGO forgot to either adjust or cancel that combination model. There were also some Kanohi mask packs that contained 2 random Kanohi masks that the Toa could each wear, since in the story, they collected Kanohi masks to sometimes use as a secondary mask. 2002 would also introduce gold and silver Kanohi masks, since in the 2002 story, the Toa would wear the gold Kanohi masks during the battle against the Vorox, while the silver masks were to represent the masks when they are in their dormant state. You could get these in the Kanohi mask packs released in 2002, but not with the actual sets themselves. Not to mention, you have to wait 6 months to get them anyways. In 2002, we would then get the Toa Nuva, which were the Toa Mata returning in new forms and new powers. This marked the first time in Bionicle history where we have a new set release of an existing character, both overall and with the Toa. The sets were named Tahu Nuva, Kopaka Nuva, Gali Nuva, you get the idea. Yeah, I'm not going to say Nuva each time because that would just take too long. The Toa Nuva looked very different from the original Toa Mata. Speaking of which, I remember seeing some articles on bzpower.com where some fans referred to the original Toa as the Toa Olda, since Nuva sounded like Nuva. That sounds like it makes sense, but I'm still going to call them Toa Mata, since Mata sounds more official than Olda. Also, Olda? What kind of a name is that? Anyway, the major changes between the Toa Mata to the Toa Nuva is that they wear silver armor on their bodies, and they also carry new weapons. The weapons can also be used in another way besides just being used as a weapon. Tahu's sword pieces can be attached to a foot to create a lava surfboard. Kopaka's weapons can be attached to his feet to make skis. Gali's axes can be attached to her feet for when she is swimming underwater. Onua's drill pieces can also be attached to his feet to create rock skis. Anyway, Pohatu has some claw weapons that can be attached together to create a Koden ball, which can be kicked around like the rock from before, although he still has the foot coverings as he did in his first form, but now they are in silver. And lastly, Liwa can position his sword pieces to his side to glide, although for some reason, the canister shows an image where you can put both weapons in his hand, much like how Kopaka holds both his weapons in one hand, as well as Tahu in the Toa Nuva promo image. They also included some extra gear pieces and ball pieces, allowing you to choose what arms, or in Pohatu's case, legs, move with the gear. Although what I don't understand is that although Gali and Liwa each have a weapon in each hand, the instructions default you to have only one arm be attached to the gears. But then again, having both Liwa's arms be attached to his gears would make it harder to position his arms and his gliding ability without taking the arm out and back in first. Now, some of you may recall that in Mask of Light, that there was a scene where Tahu and Gali used Tahu's lava board to escape Takoro after the Rahkshi had destroyed it. But is it possible to do that with the actual figures? Well, the answer is yes, but not all that well. I guess it could be because Tahu's foot has to be facing from one side the whole time, but I do remember seeing somebody put both Tahu and Gali on the lava board on BZ Power a long time ago, and this was before the movie came out. So, coincidence, I say. As mentioned before, I won't be mentioning Takanuva's original set release until a later video, so the next Toa sets we'll be talking about are the Toa Metru in 2004. The Toa Metru are a different team of Toa from the Toa Mata. The Toa Metru are characters we've seen already, however. They are the same characters as the Turaga on Mata Nui. During this time, we learned that the Turaga used to be Toa themselves, who became Turaga after fulfilling their destinies and chose to sacrifice their powers for the greater good. We did learn in 2003 that a Matoran can become a Toa, and then in 2004, we learned a Toa can become a Turaga. Although can a Toa who is never a Matoran become a Turaga? I mean, none have done so in the storyline. I guess it's possible. The Toa Metru consisted of Vakama, Nuju, Nokama, Anawa, Wenua, and Matau. Although I used to think that Anawa was pronounced Oniwa until I heard it pronounced as it actually is in the Mata Nui character guide on the Mask of Light DVD, and in the opening narration of Legends of Metru Nui. But something I've noticed is that Anawa is never referred to by name in any of the movies apart from these two instances. I'm surprised I was able to remember it very well. Getting back to the actual sets, the Toa Metru took on darker colors than the Toa Mata had, which was a thing that 2004 began doing. I am not sure why though. Perhaps it was because we began having more serious and darker storylines at this point, considering how bright and sunny the first 3 years were. Another thing the Toa Metru introduced were movable heads instead of the more fixed heads that the Toa Mata had. The Toa Metru also had bendable knees. They were not the first sets to have bendable knees. That honor goes to the Rahkshi, which we'll look over next time. The Rahkshi introduced the bendable knees, and the Toa Metru are the first Toa sets to have them. The Toa Metru, much like the Toa Nuva, had weapons that could be positioned in a few ways. Vakama, Nokama, Matau, and Anawa could have their weapons either be in their hands or on their backs, with Matau's also folding out to create wings. Nuju could have his weapons either in his hands or on his feet, and Wenua could either have his weapons be positioned one in each hand or put together like this. I did come up with an interesting way you can attach his weapons to his back a while ago, and this is how I did it. You will need another blue pin piece in order to do this, however. The headpieces that are introduced with the Toa Metru had an easier way to get the eye stalk piece in and out of their heads. For the Toa Mata, the eye stalks would click in the back of their heads, and getting them out can be hard. I do remember seeing somebody give a tutorial on BZ Power on how to get the eye stalk piece out, but I remember when I did this tutorial a long time ago, somebody complained that their pieces broke while doing this. I should point out, I tried this out many times, and I haven't broken any of my pieces while doing this. All I can say is, do this at your own risk. I am not responsible for any pieces breaking, unless I'm the one who's doing it. But for the Toa Metru, their eye stalks just slide into the back of their heads, and to keep them in, you just need to put a pin piece in through the side of their heads. And to get them out, just push the pin piece out. Easy as that. Much like how the Toa Mata were released again as Toa Nuva, the Toa Metru were released again in another form, the Toa Ignika. When the Toa Metru returned to Metru Nui to rescue the sleeping Matoran, they discovered the city was covered in webs. This was due to the city being filled with spider-like creatures called the Visorak. The Visorak captured the Toa Metru and trapped them in cocoons. This resulted in the Toa mutating into half Toa, half Rahkshi hybrids known as the Toa Ignika. The Toa Ignika used a different body build from the Toa Metru and the Toa Mata. Something I had noticed is that one arm is different from the other, which I assumed was because one arm was from the Toa half and the other arm was from the Rahkshi half. The Toa Ignika also each had a Roduka spinner on their backs, which had this ripcord which, when pulled, launches the Roduka spinner out. The masks the Toa Ignika have are very different in that they aren't like any of the masks we've gotten before. In fact, this is what a Toa Ignika looks like without their mask on. Story-wise, the masks are fused to their faces, but as the actual set, we can do this. As you can see, a maskless Toa Ignika's head is just a left arm with Borok eyes added on. which I think this marks the only time any Toa uses Vorox eyes. Whenua also has an added feature on his weapon where his drill can go up and down, as you can see here. In 2006, we resume the story in present time, and what's interesting is that we don't start the year or the story with the Toa. In fact, I at first thought that they were going to have to depend on Matoran to fight off the bad guys this time, but this was not the case. Once again, we do get a new Toa team, and much like how the Toa Metru were introduced to us as the Turaga of Mata Nui, the new Toa, the Toa Ignika, yes, it's pronounced Ignika, some people pronounced it as Ignika, but it's Ignika. Anyway, the Toa Ignika were first introduced to us as the Matoran characters introduced during the 2001 and 2003 storyline. Although I had thought that if any Matoran characters we were familiar with did become Toa, they would have to be the 6 Matoran we got in 2001 from McDonald's. But this was only the case for 4 of them. The other 2 Toa were other Matoran introduced to us later in the story. The Toa Ignika consisted of Jala, Matoro, Holly, Huki, Nuparu, and Kongu. The 2 Matoran from 2001 that didn't become Toa were Maku and Onapu. Instead of them becoming Toa, Holly and Nuparu were. Maybe it's because they made a larger impact in the story by this point, considering Nuparu invented the Boxer, and Holly became the new Chronicler after Takua became a Toa. But then, who became the Chronicler after Holly became a Toa? Let me look this up. Okay, I looked it up, and Kopike was the next to become a Chronicler. But what if he becomes a Toa? Who will become the Chronicler then? Oh, we shouldn't worry about that, should we? I was quite excited for the Toa Ignika, and while they aren't the best Toa sets ever made, they were pretty decent. I know there are some people that didn't like how the Toa Ignika looked with their rubber masks, as well as what their head pieces looked like without their masks on. Just a green and white stub with no face. I actually think this looks cool, but I am disappointed that they don't glow in the dark as the magazines originally advertised. Was this an element that was cancelled at the last minute? And if so, why cancel it? Did it just not work? The Toa Ignika don't use any gears like the previous sets had, which was pretty much the case for the sets from this point onwards, although they would be reintroduced in Generation 2. But for Generation 1, the Toa Ignika were the last we've seen of the gears. The build for the Toa Ignika is pretty much the general build that we would have for Toa sets from this point onwards. The Toa Ignika each had a Zammer Sphere launcher in one hand and a light up sword in the other. Although Nuparu had special claw pieces on his hands, and with his hands like that, there is no way to get the Zammer Sphere launcher in his hand then. So instead, his Zammer Sphere launcher is attached to his back. As for the launchers themselves, the Piraka who were released earlier that year also had them. The Toa Ignika also had these add-on pieces that could allow the launcher to carry 4 spheres. The Toa Ignika continued to use the same darker colors as the Toa Metru. However, this series of Toa marked a milestone when it comes to the colors, as we have one of the familiar 6 colors be changed out. Huki was the first Toa of Stone, who was not brown. When I first saw the images online, I was quite surprised by this. In fact, I wasn't sure how to identify him from Nuparu since Huki had a dark gray and yellow color scheme, which from this point onwards, we would have the color yellow be used instead of brown. Most of the time. As for the Zammer spheres, they all had different colored spheres. Well, they do share colors, but they don't all use the same color. Jala and Holly use green ones, Kongu and Matoro use blue ones, and Nuparu and Huki use yellow and or red ones. It may vary. Personally, I think red is more canonically accurate, as it's what's shown on the box, but my Nuparu only had one that was completely red, and all of my Huki spheres were yellow. Major disappointment. But with the spheres getting released in pure red years later in Hero Factory, I was able to fix this. And, as you might have guessed, just as the Toa Mata became the Toa Nuva, and the Toa Metru became the Toa Hordika, the Toa Ignika also became a new Toa team. In this case, they became the Toa Mari. This happened when the Toa Ignika headed to Mari Nui, when the Kanohi Ignika transformed them into the Toa Mari, which also happens to be the only way this transformation could be reversed, even though that never happened in the story. The Toa Mari were built very differently from one another. Jala, Nuparu, and Mitoro are each still using the same build as before with some slight differences. Huki and Holly use the same torso as the Piraka, and Kongu uses a new body build. The Toa Mari also have some rubber hoses on their bodies as they need to breathe underwater. Well, actually, story-wise, the Toa Mari are unable to breathe on land. Well, until they are transported back to Metru Nui at the end of 2007. I guess it makes sense that they are all built very differently from one another, since in the previous years, all the Toa sets pretty much were all clones of one another. This was also the case for the enemy sets from the same year, the Baraki. If you didn't like the masks from the Toa Ignika series, you'll be happy to know that the Toa Metru heads are brought back for the Toa Mari, which I honestly prefer over the Toa Ignika heads anyway. They also each contain a Kordak blaster, or in Kongu's case, 2. Did you miss the Toa Nuva after these 4 long years? Well, you're in luck because in 2008, we see the Toa Nuva return. Although I would think that they'd become Turaga by the time the Toa Ignika came around, but nope, they're still Toa. Although we aren't given new sets for all of them right away. Nope, in the first wave of 2008, we only get half the team. We get Kopaka, Liwa, and Bohatu for the Fantoka wave, along with 3 members of the Brotherhood of Makuta. We don't go back to the Mata Nui era color schemes despite the Toa Nuva coming back at this point. Liwa is now lime green and gray, Bohatu is now orange and gray, which, by the way, this is the only wave where orange replaces brown, and Kopaka is white and gray. Dark gray. In fact, Kopaka's appearance has also changed greatly with his eye scope switching sides for some reason. Did the designers think this was Toa Nuju? The Toa during this wave are given jetpacks and wings, as well as having the feature allowing them to connect with a Matoran on their back at the same time. The Makuta also had this feature, but we'll talk about them next time. Tahu, Gali, and Onua do get released later in the same year, along with 3 other members of the Brotherhood of Makuta, which we resume having yellow as a color. This set wave was called Mystica, and was set in the swamps of Kardanui, which is where this point of the storyline takes place in. The Toa in this wave also have features allowing them to attach to Matoran, and they even advertise that you do this, but I think this was done in an attempt to get people to buy more figures, as unlike in the first wave, these combinations don't happen at any point in the story. But I do like how, unlike in the first wave, where all the Matoran color match with their Toa, the Mystica wave doesn't do that, since the Matoran that match with their respective Toa are Shadow Matoran. The builds for the Toa continue using the same builds as the Piraka and Toa Ignika, with Onua, Liwa, and Kopaka using Ignika builds, Bohatu using the same build as Toa Mari Kongu, and Tahu and Gali each using Piraka builds. Although not a lot of people think Gali looks all that great in this version. Probably the most weakest version of her yet. The Toa in the Fantoka wave each have a new ball launcher, but the balls are the same as the Zammer spheres we had before with the Toa Ignika, just now in silver. As for the Mystica Wave, they use this new sort of launcher where you push down on this, which pushes air into the bullet and launches it out. They also continue to use the Toa Metru headpieces, which is pretty good. As far as I know, while they are new in appearance, they didn't transform at all. Instead, this is them wearing some new armor. They're still the same Toa Nuva underneath, but with this new armor, they look different. In 2009, we move away from the Matoran universe and end up in another world called Bara Magna. Now, Bara Magna doesn't have any Toa, but they do have these beings called the Glatorian. Now, for this video, I won't be including Vorox, Skrall, or Stronius since they go into the category of enemy sets. But the rest of the Glatorian do qualify, and while Malum and Strack both attempted to kill off a fellow Glatorian in the story, with the latter not learning from the former attempting this on him, I don't consider them to be bad guys since they don't really do anything evil in the story as far as I know. The Glatorian sets mostly use the same build as the Toa sets that came from the past 3 years at this point, but much like with the Toa Mari and the Karda Nui Toa, they use slightly different builds, but I won't go over all of them here. They do introduce new pieces as well as a Thornax launcher, a life meter on their backs which is used for a game, mostly new weapon pieces, and they introduce a new style of head, the Glatorian heads. The Glatorian headpieces are different from the headpieces the Toa use in that their masks attach from the top of their heads instead of from the front. These heads would also be carried over into the successor series, Hero Factory. In the first wave of Glatorian sets, we get Malum, Gresh, Terex, and Strack, while in the second wave we get Akar, Vastus, Hina, Galu, and Mata Nui. And no, I didn't forget to mention any characters. Any characters' names I didn't mention them intentionally. This is for the good guys only. I didn't forget Skrall, I didn't forget Stronius, and I didn't forget Vorox. They are not mentioned because they don't qualify. Closing off Generation 1, we have the Bionicle Stars sets. Like before, I'm only mentioning the good guys, and in this case, the good guy sets we have are Tahu, Takanuva, and Gresh. The Bionicle Stars sets all use the same build as the Kardatoran and the Agori, which isn't anything that special. If you collect all 6 sets, you can add the gold armor pieces onto Tahu, but as far as functions are concerned, there's none. Story-wise, Tahu is changed back into a Toa Mata by the Toa Ignika for the final battle, but he's still wearing his adaptive armor from 2008. Takanuva also is different in that he uses his ability to change the color of his armor from a white and gold appearance to a white and silver appearance. Why he did that? Maybe to make him more white since he is the white representative for this wave. And Gresh also looks differently. Personally, I see this as a downgrade from the previous Gresh. After this, Bionicle's first generation came to a close and was replaced with Hero Factory. Hero Factory ran for 4.5 years until Bionicle returned with a reboot. Hero Factory introduced a new character build which for some time was referred to as the Hero Factory building system, even though the first wave used the same build as Bionicle in its first generation, and this new building system was introduced in its second wave. But as this build was also used with other themes such as the superhero construction figures, the Chima construction figures, the Star Wars construction figures, and Bionicle's second generation, people began referring to this new build as the Character and Creature Building System, or CCBS for short. The new Toa sets would use this new build along with some new parts made especially for this new generation. They brought in a new gearbox, bringing back gears into Bionicle after 9 years, and they brought in some new headpieces. These new headpieces are similar to the Toa Metro headpieces as far as the eye stalk is concerned. Although this time around, when you push down on them, you can make the masks fall off. Also, remember the gold masks the Toa Mata got in 2002 that you didn't get with the actual sets, but only got them in the mask packs? In this generation, you get the gold masks with the Toa sets themselves. Although I don't know why LEGO didn't do this with the original Toa. Now the 2016 Toa sets, which I didn't get, used a different build that was completely new, and they also could combine with their elemental creatures. Kopaka was released with his elemental creature Melum, while the rest of the Toa and elemental creatures were released separately. I don't quite understand why Kopaka of all Toa was released with his elemental creature, since he's not the leader, and he didn't do anything special in Journey to 1 that at least stood out from the rest of the Toa. I am guessing they did this to force people to have to buy both waves of sets, because if you get one, you got to get them all, right? Boy, did that end so well. And that does it for the evolution of the Toa sets. I know I may have forgotten a few things, but I think I covered the most important parts of the sets. In the next one, I will be looking over the evolution of the enemy sets. I'll see you all then.